Of James. That's what we've been doing for the last several weeks, and we'll continue with that today. Chapter 2, and we're starting at about verse 15. I want to look at this section as a whole, and so we'll start in verse 15, really maybe even verse 14, kind of reintroducing what James is saying and where he is going with all of this. So we'll be in the middle of James chapter 2, studying from there together this morning. Before we get into that any further, though, let's pray together. Holy God, we're thankful for all the blessings that you together today, and especially for your Son, his sacrifice, which we are remembering and honoring today. We pray that you'd be with us as we worship, as we discuss your word together, as we remember him. Help us to be governed by a clear mind, by sincere hearts. Help us to know you and to love you. Help us to encourage each other as we're here together as well. We're thankful for your word and pray you'd be with us as we study it together. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, here in James chapter 2, beginning in about verse 14, James is really starting to discuss with us the relationship of faith and works. This is a well-known section, I suppose, but here he is looking at the relationship between those two, and through that, as we talked about a little bit last week, really defining or clarifying what we're talking about in the first place, or what he is talking about in the first place when he uses terminology like that. What he says about what faith is, or what he says about what works do, or what they're meant to do, will help us to understand what that means. And of course, how it's not in any way opposed to the Apostle Paul saying things, for instance, that seem at face value, just on a kind of a one-to-one comparison, to be almost opposed to this. If one man's saying, well, we're saved by God's grace through faith and not by works, and now James is saying, well, can't be saved by just faith, there has to be works. But these two men do agree, and really we just see what they're saying clarifies what those terms mean and in what way he's speaking to us about it. So, the rhetorical question that's brought up there in verse 14, what does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith save him? As we talked about last week, really the literal reading of that second question, that final question, the faith cannot save him, can it? Is what James asks there. And as we alluded to, that definite article that he uses there, the faith, can the faith, when used in this way, when used in that kind of context, it often is pointing towards a definition that has already appeared earlier, a definition or a sense of the word that he has just used. It's a way of referring back to that. It's almost as if better to say, can that faith, can that kind of faith save him, if that's what we're dealing with? Well, the definition or the type of faith that James was just looking at, hypothetically, prospectively, was the kind that is merely a man claiming that he has it or speaking of it, and that's it. That's the extent of it. There's nothing else that would really make up that faith. It's just a man talking about it. Can that faith save him? No. It's a rhetorical. There's the implied kind of obvious answer that no, that is not going to truly accomplish anything. And so from there, he begins in verse 15 and really through the rest of the chapter, uses these four different examples to cement his point and to bring home exactly what he's talking about. He's going to illustrate faith in a few different ways. And as we briefly talked about last week, we just kind of set this up, weren't really able to look at any of them in detail, so that's what we'll do together today. But each of these ends with some kind of very simple statement, and oftentimes it's almost exactly the same statement that is proving what his main premise is. You see this verse 17, verse 20, verse 24, and then verse 26. They all have this through line the idea that faith by itself, if it doesn't have works, is dead. He gets back to that really 4 different times. He's going to have those kind of summary statements at the end of each of those examples. He has 2 negative examples and 2 positive examples. And he has 2 that seem to deal more with our interactions with each other, kind of the things that we would do for or towards someone else, and 2 that have more to do with a vertical relationship, our interaction with, our view, our mindset towards God, and how we interact with Him. And so from that, we get some good contrasts, I suppose. So let's consider the first and the last. His first example there, verses 15 through 17, is this kind of unhelpful man. He's a sort of hypothetical guy, but this is not at all a hypothetical situation. It's something that does happen. A brother or sister is naked, destitute of daily food, and someone just says, "Depart in peace, be warmed and filled," but you don't give them the things which are needed for the body. What does it profit? Well, so he's illustrating there the idea of someone saying something that's nice, sounds good, sounds like the kind of thing you're supposed to say in that type of situation, but he didn't do anything about it. He didn't do anything to help. So how's that person feeling about things now? Well, they weren't helped at all. You have this totally unhelpful person who is just really giving platitudes. Well, this contrasts with his final example, verses 25 and 26. Rahab the harlot. It says, "Wasn't she justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way? For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also." What is Rahab doing when she does what she does? We're familiar maybe with the story of Rahab from the book of Joshua, this Canaanite woman, a woman of Jericho who helps these Israelite spies. What's she doing there, though? Why is that an act of faith? Or, Mike?
They were unknown to her. She was taking a chance to bring these men into her place of abode.
Okay. She's risking a lot. These 2 strangers come in. She doesn't know them from Adam. She knows where they're from, kind of who they belong to, that they're Israelites. And she knows quite a bit about Israel by this point and their God. And so she's willing to take that risk, but she's putting a lot on the line to help essential strangers. Someone else had Ian.
The reason why she helps them is because she's heard of the God of Israel.
Yeah.
And she doesn't know a full understanding, even whatever would have been considered at that time, but she recognizes that this God, these people, I need to pay attention to him. I want to go to his side. And so doing what she can to be of service to God.
Yeah. Doing what she can to be of service to God and displaying that through, ultimately, on the ground level, a service to God's people. She's going to help these men save their lives because she's decided, I'm on God's side. As Ian points out, just the little that she knows of him, he's giving his people victory wherever they go. And I don't want to stand against that. I don't have a hope. Our people don't have a hope, as she tells them. The people's hearts have melted within them. Everyone here is terrified. We kind of don't see a way that we might be able to stop this when everyone else has failed in fighting against these people of Jehovah. So she decides she's going to be on his side. Well, if you look at those as kind of 2 opposing examples, this unhelpful man who provides nothing and this woman who risks a lot we would say, again, if we're kind of putting it in today's terms or what this would look like now, she's risking a lot to minister to God's people. She's risking a lot to give something to someone who belongs to God. And that's exactly what was lacking from the first example. It would be like Rahab saying to those men, "Good luck, I hope you guys get out of here." Well, can we hide somewhere? No, you need to leave now. The guards are coming. You guys got to get out of here, but I hope it all works out for you. I'll be thinking about you. well, they're going to get picked up by the guards and probably executed, and so her saying, good luck, really didn't do anything, did it? Well, that's not what she does. So she's illustrating for us what it looks like when a faith, when a decision and a belief and confidence in God leads you to act on that, leads you to do something. What can that look like? Well, it can look like that. So his point here, as he states it this way in verse 26, as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. We think of life. What does life require? If you have a human body, what does that need to be alive? It needs more than just the body, doesn't it? And if you've ever been to an open casket funeral, if you've ever seen just a body, and I remember doing that at kind of a young age, and the striking, even to a young child, it's a striking and very clear thing that is going on there. This body isn't moving. That's what I remember noticing most of all when I was very young, seeing my first dead body. It's not moving. It's not like seeing a person sleep because they're not breathing. It's different. Yes, it looks like a person. Yes, it is a body. Yes, it has all of the same things outwardly that we have, but it's not alive. There's no soul in there. There's no life in there. It's not actually doing what a person does. It's just something that looks like it. Well, in the same way, he's saying, as the body without the spirit is dead, it's not really a person anymore. It's just a body. It's not alive. Faith without works, he says, is just as dead. It's exactly the same thing. That faith, to truly be what it's supposed to be, to truly be what it's representing on the outside, needs to have life. It needs to have a soul. It needs to have something that is within it, that is energizing, that is enlivening it. And in James's examples, what that thing is the works that accompany it, is what you're actually doing with that faith, with that belief that might be there. So, in particular, with that first and last example, an expression of faith, an outworking of faith, is a duty of helpful attention to those in need, a duty of actually helping someone, even at personal risk, even at personal inconvenience, that I don't just say, well, I hope everyone's fine, but I do something about that. I clothe them. I give them the warmth of my fire. I feed them with my food, whatever it might be. All right, comments, questions, anything on those first two examples? Gary, go ahead.
I honestly don't think that Martin Luther would let a man go hungry or naked if he had an opportunity to help them. But the same man didn't believe what James said, called it a right strawy epistle.
Yeah. Yeah, and this, as we mentioned kind of at the beginning, probably it's the second chapter that has given people of various schools of thought trouble for hundreds of years. Anything else here on, again, those first and last? In between, you have these other two examples, if you want to call them that, really. I think in verses 18 through 20 and then 21 through 24, two other ways of illustrating this. Well, let's look at two different ways that we can understand belief. Faith, belief, two things very closely entwined with each other. Oftentimes they're used relatively synonymously in Scripture. Let's talk about belief. Okay, you can believe like demons do. Demons believe that God exists. I don't know what that said, but demons believe that God exists? Yeah, absolutely. We've been looking in Mark at Jesus' interactions with demons. What do we find out from a lot of those accounts when Jesus goes someplace where there's a demon-possessed person? About the belief, the knowledge that demons have. They're scared. Yeah, Jesus shows up and They say, we know who this is. Oftentimes they know more. Well, in the whole first half of Mark, the demons know more than any of the people do, any of the just normal human beings. The demons know exactly who Jesus is, and what's their response to that? They're terrified. Get away from here. Don't mess with us. We don't want you dealing with us. Please, just go away and leave us alone. Well, that's a belief. We wouldn't call it a faith, but it's a belief, knowledge of something that causes fear only. All right. There's another kind of belief or faith as well. He'll talk about this with Abraham, the prime example, the great example that is often reached for in the New Testament. We're speaking of any faith in God. He looks at Abraham, our father. Well, Abraham's certainly a man of faith. That's clear even from the original account itself, which James quotes for us here in verse 23. Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. What a wonderful thing to be said of someone. He's called ultimately in verse 23, what? What name does Abraham get for himself? The friend of God. What a thing to say. What a thing to be said of someone. He's the friend of God. Why? Well, he has faith. He believes God. But not everyone who believes God is the friend of God. Are demons the friend of God? No, they're the enemy of God. They're on the other side. What's the difference? How are we bridging that gulf? Well, clearly we are talking about different qualities of faith, yes. But James's point here is Abraham's motivates him to do something else. It leads to something. It isn't a faith without works. It isn't a faith that leads only to fear, because demons know their lot. They know where they're going to be. They know what is the end of them. Abraham's motivates him to action. And so he ends up saying that Abraham is justified by works. In verse 22, I guess is the key to all of this. Do you see that faith was working together with his works? And by works, faith was made perfect. Faith existed. Abraham's faith existed before offering Isaac. That's the example that he's looking at there, verse 21. He talks about him offering Isaac, his son, on the altar. Abraham had faith before that. He had faith long before that. You read the Genesis account, and his belief in God shows up and is attributed to him long before that event, long before Genesis 22, when he's going to offer Isaac on the mountains. So that's there, and it's even known by God, and it's even approved by God, and it gets that stamp that says he believed God and it was accounted to him for righteousness. All of this far predates Abraham offering Isaac. But, he says, it was perfected, it was completed, made whole by his obedience, by the results, by the works. So the two things are working together, and he's getting to the same point that he has before. If you have one and not the other, then you have a dead body. You have one and not the other, you have nothing. You don't have the full complement. You don't have the full thing that you are meant to have if you want a relationship with God. So there, the positive again, as a work of faith, as we said earlier, we have this duty of helpful attention to those in need that you could find from an example like Rahab's. From Abraham, what do we see? Well, this duty of obedience to God, sacrificing everything with no holding back, being willing to do whatever we're called to do. And again, he could have looked at any numbers of examples from Abraham's life before and probably after offering Isaac, the fact that he's willing to leave everything behind when God calls him in the first place to go to Canaan. Abraham was a man regularly acquainted with sacrificing his will, his desires, his plans, his life, willing to do that to go and follow God. Well, we're called upon to do this exact same thing as well. But that completes, that perfects our faith. Denise?
I like to think, too, of the works being like what Jesus
That's a very good way of looking at it. And as a just sort of a natural outgrowth of who this person is, what I believe, what I think about God, my works are the fruit that comes from that springs forth from that, again, almost as a natural process, almost as a natural byproduct. And that does, I believe, I think that's a good way of looking at it. It gets to the heart of what James is saying here, that the two work together. In verse 22, the faith was working together with his works. They are not separate things. I believe this, and so that's good, and then I do this, so that's what God is going to look at, and that's why he'll save me. Or on exactly the other side, I believe this, and that's all God cares about, that I believe, so I'm going to do this, and that's all some other thing. I'll be forgiven no matter what. Well, neither one of these approaches work. Neither one of these truly makes sense. He is looking at what we do as a whole, who we are as a whole, that faith is working together with works to prove the character of a man, to prove our true faith in God, what we actually believe of him. Yeah, good point there. Yeah, Lord.
And the works you do also can show Christ to others. And I think it's gotten kind of a bad rap in today's world if you say if something terrible happens to someone, oh, you'll be in my thoughts and prayers. And to us, the best thing you could do is pray for someone. But to the world, many times that sounds like a cop-out.
Yeah.
But you need to follow that up with something practical and show Jesus to the world.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And even, I don't know, I guess even when it is well-intentioned, it can be a way for us to say sort of, this is the extent of what I'm willing to do. I'll pray about it, but that's it. Again, yes, that's good. That's the very best place to start, if nothing else, that we would be remembering people to our Father. But what else are we going to do? What else are we willing to offer as a result of our faith, as a result of what we want to see happen with this person? Taylor. Yeah, that's, again, that first, verses 15 through 17, and it goes back hand in glove with what James was talking about in chapter 1 with being a doer of the word and not a hearer only. Here he's kind of talking about being a doer of faith and not a sayer only, that what I do actually backs up whatever hollow-sounding pronouncements I might make. Well, they're not hollow if I do something about it. If I say I'm praying for you, and I pray for you, and I do what I can, and I offer you whatever help a person might offer, then that's real. Then that isn't a platitude. That's me truly acting on what I believe and acting on what I've said. And yes, Jesus is the ultimate example of that, as we'd expect. Good points there. Anything else to mention here? Others on really the whole of chapter 2. Believe it or not, I'm almost ready to move on from that. I don't know if that really counts as me getting like 13 verses done this morning. We looked at some of them last week, but anything else to mention there on chapter 2? Faith and works. All right, moving into chapter 3 then. Here is a kind of a quick change, kind of James reversing fields on us a little bit and doing so rather abruptly. But he cautions in verse 1 of chapter 3, "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment." All right, this is kind of an attention-grabbing statement to make. And maybe James means it in that way, as something that just calls the attention of his readers or his listeners Be careful that you don't become a teacher of the Bible to someone. Well, that sounds provocative, doesn't it? That sounds kind of controversial to say, watch out if you're thinking of becoming a Bible teacher. Dylan would kill me if he knew we were saying anything like this, at a time where we're trying to find teachers for the next quarter or whatever. That's not when you'd want to talk about that. Be careful that you don't teach the Bible to anyone. Hang on, is that what we're all supposed to be doing? Isn't that what the first century church did? Everywhere they went preaching the word. That's the example that we have of them all throughout the book of Acts. And now he's saying, that may not be you that you want to be doing that. The reason that he gives for that, and again, I think largely it is a way of introducing his next topic, which could be related to the first largely from what Taylor was just saying and what we mentioned there, the idea, going back to verses 15 and 17, of it's easy to say something, it's easy to talk about faith, it's easy to represent with words who you are, but is it harder to do them? Yes. 9 times out of 10, if not every single time, it's harder to do something than it is to talk about it. And so be careful what you say. Be careful what you are willing to say or to claim of yourself. That might be some of the connection there between chapter 2 and where he's going in chapter 3. But as his way of introducing this next topic, which is speech, it's going to be the central concern at least through verse 12 here in chapter 3. Speech is the central component of teaching. We don't have a Bible class where I just show you pictures of something and then we say, all right, so we all got it. We'll come back next week and study the Bible. We don't get up here and someone grunts and points at something. We don't do any of that. We speak. A person gets up and they talk, and I ask you, do you have a question or a comment? And I don't want you sitting in your seat grunting and pointing when you give a question or comment. I want you to talk to me. I want you to say something. But that's how the Word of God is taught. As a word, as a collection of words. It's through speech. So since that is the central thing, he's explaining then this stricter judgment, I believe, in verse 2 and the rest of what follows. Why is it that a teacher is in greater jeopardy, or why is it that he will receive a stricter judgment? Yes, there is a part of that says, well, and here again, this interacts so much with what we've been talking about on Wednesdays with Mark, with Jesus talking about offending these little ones and making these little ones stumble, that constantly Jesus and others put so much attention on. It's bad if you do something wrong yourself. If you sin yourself, that's obviously bad and you don't want to do it. But there is nothing worse than you making someone else stumble as well. You pull someone else away from their faith, then you're in serious trouble. Then you are looking at a whole other order of wrong and danger. And so maybe this stricter judgment does have to do with, okay, the teacher has influence upon numerous people. They have a responsibility. And because of the weight of that responsibility, they'll bear this stricter judgment. They'll be held to that kind of accountability. And that's part of it. But I think maybe more to the point of this whole chapter, when he's talking about receiving a stricter judgment, is just simply that he is doing most of his work, he is doing that activity in a realm that is so difficult. He's using speech to do all of this, and speech is an area of great potential difficulty. He's going to go on to warn us about all of these dangers that the tongue brings with it, all of the many various ways in which we can fall short with our speech, with our words. So since that is such a strictly judged area, and biblically it definitely is, you look everywhere in the Scriptures and God is concerned with what you say. You think maybe of Isaiah 6, has always been an interesting passage to me, where Isaiah is summoned before the throne of God himself. And what is the first thing he says when he realizes, I'm not supposed to be here, I'm undone? He says, I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. That he is equating those two things together. That I sin in speech, that I'm a man who speaks things that are profane, that should not be before God, that do not match up to his holiness, and yet here I am. He equates his person with his speech, with his lips, with his mouth. And again, biblically, you find this all over the place. Look, just flip through Proverbs sometimes and see how many Proverbs are saying, don't say things that are untrue, don't talk too much, don't say things that are silly, don't boast, don't put other people down. All these different ways in which we can sin with our speech. So since that is an area of stricter judgment, if a teacher is one who is primarily speaking to people, well, it makes sense then that you really got to be on guard. You really got to be watchful, because everything you do is involved in that arena. So in verse 2, he's setting out the unhappy reality of things. We all stumble in many things. That's true, isn't it? No matter how long you've been a Christian, I just had Gary Guerin say, oh yeah, no matter how long you've been at it, no matter how long you've been trying, no matter how hard you work, no matter how dedicated you are to eradicating sin from your life, we all stumble in many things. We're all flawed. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to do what we know is wrong, what we should not do. It is the unhappy reality of life that we all still sin, and in many different ways. He says in many things across the board. But his point that he's starting to get to here in verse 2 is really a surprising point to make. Let's read verse 2, going through the first part of verse 5, actually. We all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he's a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships. Though they're so large and driven by fierce winds, they're turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. All right. What's the point he's making here? He uses a couple of examples to get there, but what's his real point? Gary?
The tongue is one of the smaller parts of our body.
Yep.
Just as bits are small things that control a horse, or a rudder is a small thing that controls an enormous ship.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Little controlling big.
Okay. Little controlling big, that the tongue is, physically speaking, it's not very much of you. I don't know what it would weigh if you cut it out and put it on a scale, but it wouldn't be much. You wouldn't lose a whole lot by getting rid of that, just as far as mass. But it controls a lot. This is kind of, especially in view of everything else that's going to come, and kind of what we know of this passage and what we think of when James is talking about the tongue, and already from verse 1 even, what he's given as a warning, the idea of strict judgment and being careful and all these sorts of things, has a very negative cast, and he'll go on to talk about it being untamable and, a world of fire, and it's really inflamed with the fires of hell themselves and all the dangers, all the bad things that can come from misuse of speech, misuse of our tongues. But what he's starting with here in verses 2 through 5 is surprising, is really kind of a positive point to make, if you understand how I mean that. He is saying here that somehow managing control of words enables us control over our whole selves. So he doesn't start by saying, yes, the tongue is small and it can It can control, it can do bad things, and that's why you got to watch out for it, because it's going to mess you up, and it's going to throw everything in your life in disarray, and you're going to say the wrong thing, and you're going to be in big trouble. He starts by looking at these things that say, if you don't stumble in word, if you can control that, if you can master that, then you will be a perfect, a complete person, able also to bridle the whole body. He is telling us here that there is a key to self-control, a key to self-mastery that is very elusive, that is very hard to find. But he says, here's how you do it. You start with, you control your speech, you control word, and then the rest can actually come into control as well. How? All right, that's the most pertinent question, I guess. In what sense is that true? How is that the case? Because he's not arguing backwards. A lot of times we kind of put his point backwards. Yeah, you got to control yourself, and then the last thing that you do, because it's the hardest thing to control, eventually you'll get control over your speech as well. When you reach this kind of pinnacle of self-control, then you won't say things that you shouldn't say. James is saying it from the...
Once you manage to control your words, then your mind and your spirit follow.
Okay. Isn't there a strong connection between your mind and your words? And really, the way James is setting this up and the way he speaks about it, and our answer to that question of how is that the case, that mastering my speech lets me master my whole body? That leads me to believe that James has more in mind than literally the tongue, what you actually say, what you actually end up saying, that he has more in mind than this, and instead is focused more on kind of the general sense in which it's used in verse 2, if you don't stumble in word. If you don't stumble in word, maybe substitute for that if you don't stumble in thought. I'm not saying that that is exactly what he's saying, but in practice, it kind of in theory, it is really the point that's underlying that. What are my thoughts? Where does my mind go? What's actually happening up here? Because all of that is formulated in words. All of that is formulated in speech. And that dictates what I do. Nathan.
I was thinking the exact same thing. Matthew 12:34 says, the mouth speaks out that which fills the heart.
Yeah.
Right? So if you want to control your tongue, then you have to fill your heart with good things.
Yeah. And this goes in line with what Denise was saying earlier, too, kind of about it being fruit, that it's just what ends up as a result of what's planted, of what's there, of what's growing, is what's going to come out. The relationship between speech and mind or heart is very similar, isn't it? It's what comes out. It's what comes out of the abundance of the heart. That's where man speaks from. That's where our works, our words, everything else comes from. I have kind of a longer quotation, but I can't describe this, I don't think, better than this man has. Alec Motyer writes in his commentary on this passage, the tongue is so much more than what we actually say out loud. In fact, actual speech is probably only a small percentage of the use of the tongue. And he explains this. We can't think without formulating thoughts and words. We cannot plan without describing to ourselves, step by step, what we intend to do. We cannot imagine without painting a word picture before our inward eyes. We cannot write a letter or a book without talking it through our minds onto the paper. We cannot resent without fueling the fires of resentment in words addressed to ourselves. We cannot feel sorry for ourselves without listening to the self-pitying voice which tells us how hard done by we are. But if our tongue were so well under control that it refused to formulate the words of self-pity, the images of lustfulness, the thoughts of anger and resentment, then these things are cut down before they have a chance to live. The master switch has deprived them of any power to switch on that side of our lives. It is in this way that if anyone makes no mistakes in what he says, he is a perfect man. The control of the tongue is more than an evidence of spiritual maturity. It is the means to it. And I think that general premise is what we've been talking about, that the tongue is more than what we say out loud. It is everything that informs our thoughts. It is what is going on when you have that constantly running inner monologue, that constant conversation with yourself. You are always telling yourself what to do. You are always telling yourself what I think and what I'm going to do next and what I believe about this and what it made me feel when this guy did that and what I want to. It's all monologue. It's all words. It's all something that is being said. That's what happens when you're speaking. You're speaking out of the abundance of your heart. If there is control in that, then ultimately you have control in everything. If you master what you are thinking, then you master who you are. It's kind of the idea that Paul is getting at in 2 Corinthians 10. The idea of bringing every thought into captivity is maybe related to this. Robert?
I got kind of like a statement, and I just want to verify it here, what's going on in chapter 3. Chapter 2, it looks like things were kind of broken there, and things need to get fixed, because their faith isn't what it's supposed to be. And then he says, well, don't let not many of you become teachers. And I always look at that and I balance it against what the Hebrew writer says in the 5th chapter, when he says, you shouldn't be teachers by now.
Yeah.
So he doesn't want them in this position because things are not the way they should be right now. And so what I want to verify here is chapter 3, when he starts talking about the tongue, your perspective is that you get your words under control and your thoughts under control. That's a great first step in getting things fixed. So
Yeah.
that things can be functional, things can be active and fruitful in the body.
Yeah.
Am I right?
I think so, yeah. And again, I think that is the order that he's putting it at. A lot of times we have it reversed, but it's here's the first thing that you try to manage. Here's the first thing that you try to wrangle into submission is, how do I speak? What do I say? And of course, again, by that we mean not just what do I let myself say, but what is going on up here at all times. In word, a man is going to stumble in word. Well, if I can eliminate that, then yeah, I'm going to be ready to do everything else. I'm going to be ready to teach someone else. I'm going to be ready to serve the widow and the orphan. I'm going to be able to do all of the things that he has talked about up to this point that maybe were lacking in these churches, if I've started there. But that's the 0 point. That's where they're working up from. Yeah.
One thing I think is really an evidence, a Bible evidence, is that this concept right here that we're talking about is completely backed up and proved in neuroscience,
Yes.
psychology, and science. And God told us about it way before the scientists.
Yeah.
But that is a popular thing right now in society, is this whole self-talk and the effect that it has on the brain.
Yes, and just the connection of speech to humanity, that we, our consciousness, the linkage between being a conscious, living, active human person and being able to speak. Again, inwardly, even if you were not able to with words, but having some way of communicating these thoughts, that's how we are alive. That's how we're conscious of who we are. It is something that has so much importance biblically. So, good point. That predates our discovery of that by thousands of years. Nathan.
We often see that famous people, they get caught saying something, doing something bad, and they say every time, this is not a reflection of who I am as a person.
Yeah.
Right? It's just a bad moment. And like, I'm someone who's also done embarrassing things that I'm not proud of. Like, whenever we say that, or we think maybe I do something and someone shows me up or calls it out, and I can say, that's not who I am as a person.
Yeah.
James is saying, maybe it is.
Yeah.
That's a wake-up call that I need to change whatever it is that I'm doing. The output was something bad, so I need to change something.
Yeah. No, very good point. It is contrary to that idea that well, what I say isn't who I am. No, you are what your tongue is putting out there. You are what is going on with those words. And so that makes things very serious. But again, we'll finish here and pick up in about verse 5 next week. James is starting with this from a kind of a positive standpoint that isn't saying the tongue governs everything else, so watch out because that's where you're going to get tripped up. He'll get there. He's going to make that point. But he is also saying, look at the opportunity that this provides. Look, here's the key to figuring everything out. He's talked to us before about growing, about becoming mature, about becoming complete, all these things that we want. And so now here he's telling us, if you want that to happen, here's how you got to do it. Here's the process you need to follow. Step 1, work on this. Work on what you say. Work on your word, what you think, what you say, what that monologue is repeating. Figure that out first, and then you will be able to get everything else in order. All right, I've talked a little